All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Connie Nakano. I'm Communications Director for the California Department of Aging. Thank you very much for joining us today in our webinar. As we're still waiting for folks to come in to the webinar, let's go to the next slide. I'll just go over a few housekeeping items. So everybody is muted, but we'd like to invite you to join us in the Q&A. You can share your questions and comments using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Closed captioning and ASL interpreting services are available. You can access that by clicking the icons at the bottom of your Zoom screen as well. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the presentation and recording will be available on CDA's YouTube channel. We'll be sure to also send a recap email that will have all the links and all the information that has also been shared today. All right, so let's get started. So just going over a little bit of what we'll be in for the next hour. We're talking about flipping the script. And every May, we shine a light on older adults in California. But this year, we're talking about flipping the script. Aging isn't about slowing down. It's about living fully with resilience, creativity, and connection. This year's theme isn't just a slogan or a catchphrase. It's really a mindset. It's time we challenge outdated assumptions and uplift the real stories of older adults in our communities. California's aging population is growing fast. By 2030, 1 in 4 Californians will be over the age of 60. And what this means is, for all of your outreach and services or messaging, if you're not thinking about older adults, this is going to be a key part of your audience if you're looking at the full 100% audience reach. We're going to talk about the power of language. The words we use. The words we use shape how people feel, how they see themselves, and how society sees aging. That's why today's webinar is about more than just outreach. It's about transformation. We're thrilled to be joined today by the National Center to Reframe Aging. Their expertise will help ground us in evidence-based messaging. And afterwards, we'll walk you through a toolkit that puts these insights into action, offering practical tools you can use, not just for this May, but also beyond. If we can go to the next slide, I'd like to introduce you today to today's speaker. Hannah Albers is a program director of the National Center to Reframe Aging, led by the Gerontological Society of America on behalf of 10 leading aging organizations. With a background as a trained facilitator of the Principles to Reframe Aging, Hannah oversees all functions of the National Center's work. Her efforts focus on establishing the National Center as the central hub for advancing communication strategies that improve public understanding of aging, engaging national leaders, developing tools and products, showcasing best practices, and teaching advocates across the nation. She is deeply passionate about leveraging her skills in group facilitation, strategic planning, and program management to help build communities where everyone can thrive. I'll turn it over to you, Hannah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Connie, for that warm introduction and for extending the invitation to the National Center to Reframe Aging to join you all this morning for this webinar. As we get started, just a little bit more about the National Center to Reframe Aging and our work. We are dedicated to ending ageism by advancing a more equitable and complete story about aging in America. We are the trusted source for proven research-based communication strategies to effectively frame aging and aging issues. And we are working nationwide, cultivating an active community of individuals, organizations, coalitions, many of which you are a part of or represent, to spread awareness of these unproductive thoughts about older people and influence the policies and programs that benefit all of us as we age. And we are even more dedicated to this work in this time as we think about what these policies and programs mean for us. As Connie mentioned, the National Center is led by the Gerontological Society of America on behalf of 10 national aging organizations, many of which you see, or all of which you see on the screen here. Hopefully you recognize at least one or two of those from your work. Many years ago, the LAO leaders from these organizations convened, really said, we all come from different perspectives in the field of aging, but we have the shared barrier where people just don't seem to understand the work that we do or why it's so important or why we need the funding that we need to support these programs. And that just seemed to be a missing link. And so the leader said, what's going on here? If we think about root cause analysis, where is this rooted? And identified ageism as a shared barrier in our work to improve lives for all of us as we get older. And that's where what led to working with our research partner, the Frameworks Institute, which is a social science where they conduct social science to really understand how does the American public think about these big issues, what's underlying that, and the more that we can understand that, the more we as advocates, as practitioners in the field can be more effective in communicating about the work that we do. The National Center works with four funders to support this work at a national level. Those funders are the John A. Hartford Foundation, RRF Foundation for Aging, the SCAN Foundation, and the Archstone Foundation. Those last two should maybe be familiar names to you as they are both California-based funders in your state. As I thought about the idea of flipping the script on aging, um, I thought about my first reframing aging aha moment. And I share this with you because I look back on it. This was before I knew about reframing aging at all. This was before we were celebrating Older Americans Month, where our theme was flipping the script on aging. But at the age of 22, I found myself living in a retirement community in Maryland as part of a fellowship program. And through that, I had the beautiful opportunity to get to know my neighbors, one of whom was a 92-year-old woman who had some mobility challenges, but we would go over, and as soon as we played music, she'd get up and dance with us. And through getting to know Miss Shirley, I also got to know her daughter. And one weekend, I asked her daughter, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm celebrating my 70th birthday." And it was the first moment that I had recognized or realized that generations existed in this retirement community that I was calling home. And that generations existed in this older adult population that we often talk about, and most people think about as a monolithic group of people. And I share this because I think about how not most people, 99.99% of 22-year-olds, are not going to have the opportunity to live in a retirement community, to have those aha moments. And so as I think about my work and personal conviction in this work is how can I facilitate that aha moment for others in my life who might not who aren't steeped in this work as I am, don't have the advantage and the luxury of working with older people and having that proximity to the work. And I extend that invitation to you as well. So maybe at some point during our webinar this morning, you have your own aha moment, or you hear something that facilitates maybe a retroactive aha moment that you've had. And I invite you to think about where you have influence in your professional and personal networks where you can help cultivate that for others, which is where we see this graphic, imperfect graphic of the different circles, but you can think about how we all have, regardless of our perspective and vantage point in this work, we all have pockets of influence. Professionally and also personally, thinking about the neighborhoods we're a part of, the community groups that we're a part of, the advocacy work that we do, whatever it might be thinking about the opportunities that you have in your networks to, again, facilitate maybe some of those aha moments. Um, we also shared the age-friendly ecosystem graphic here because it's a good visual representation of how we see communication as a central role in the work that we do every single day. So again, just be thinking about what you can be doing, how you can contribute, what learning you can carry with you today, and share, not only apply to your work, but also share with others. And with that, I'm going to ask you a question. So Connie shared a little bit about the theme for Older Californians Month, which is Flip the Script on Aging. So I ask you all to scan the QR code on your screen if you have your cell phone close by. Or you can go, and I'll share this screen with you. You can go to menti.com and use the code 26923940. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you like to see? Uh, how would you like to see the script flip on aging in California? So I'll give you a few moments to share your thoughts there.
Can we try to enable the other interpreter's video?
Right. I'm seeing some responses come in. We see aging is dying, hard of hearing, age is just a number, not with the times, not tech savvy, unwilling to adapt, frail or sick, used up, out of touch, slow. And then there's some positive things in here, grow. Um, keep it coming, not with the times, vulnerable, old is bad, hard of hearing, mentally weak, confused, retiring soon. Some of these words are getting bigger. So yes, we'll see this graphic continue to grow and morph, but you all hit the nail on the head with this, that these are what we see as the public conversation about what it means to get older, what it means to be an older person. And hopefully, what you all know and can share with us and is that this isn't the whole story, right? These might be pieces of the story of what is the reality for some, but that's not the whole picture of who one person is, or even what an experience of growing older looks like. So as we think about these words, hopefully today we'll share with you some strategies you can walk away with to help flip the script on those dominant narratives that we're seeing. And some of what gets in our way is the negative beliefs that are pervasive throughout our communities, throughout our country, about aging. And so these ideas are based off of the World Health Organization's definition of ageism. So when we're discussing our negative beliefs about aging, we're talking about how we think, feel, and act towards people on the basis of their age. And thinking about how those beliefs show up in multiple different levels. So we see interpersonal, how this shows up in an interpersonal way, where you might be thinking of comments that we or others make that say, "Oh, you look great for your age," and that qualifier of for your age being added is an example of how that might show up in an interpersonal way. We also see how these negative beliefs about aging show up in a compassionate way. This is sometimes referred to as elder speak. This is the high-pitched baby language used with older people, specifically in healthcare settings, but I'm sure you all could share instances where this happens across someone's life. This is the, "Oh, honey, oh, sweetie, you look, what are we doing today?" Right? So well intentioned, a lot of the times, but has a really profound impact on how and people's responses to receiving that type of elder speak. Now we see how we bring all of this with us, right? So the institutions that we're a part of, the organizations, neighborhoods, communities that we exist in. And so we see how unproductive and negative beliefs about aging show up and influence the laws, the rules, the social norms, policies, and practices of institutions that unfairly restrict and systemically disadvantage individuals because of their age. So I shared that this is based on a World Health Organization definition. And the World Health Organization has a forced retirement age, which is an example of institutionalized beliefs about aging. This idea that once you hit a certain chronological age, you're no longer valuable to the workforce. And we know that that is not true. And then we see how all of this has a really incredible and profound effect on our own internalized beliefs about our own aging process and our own beliefs about what it means to grow older. Um, it's not, there's some good news in here as well. So while this unproductive thinking about age is around us, and it's in the air we breathe, the water that we drink, it surrounds us all the time. What we found in our research is just simply being aware that we carry these unproductive thoughts about aging, about older people, reduces our likelihood to act on them. So simply being aware of how we're addressing older people in our lives and not using that might interrupt our likelihood of acting and using elder speak, or being aware that birthday cards that celebrate milestone birthdays are oftentimes very ageist and are poking fun at someone's age rather than lifting them up and celebrating them. The more that we are aware of how these subtle ways that ageism shapes our day-to-day life, the less likely we are to carry those forward. And then understanding that is really, really, really important because this isn't just kind of nice to do. There's real impact here. These thoughts and ageism has economic and health impacts to us. Um, a study. A study in 2020 looked at the cost of ageism on health conditions for persons age 60 and older in the US. And the study found that the 1 year cost of ageism was 63 billion with a B dollars. So I just think about, especially as we're hearing every day of new funding cuts that might be coming our way, think about what we could do with even just a sliver of that pie if we were able to mitigate this in a really huge way. What possibility that would bring to us. And the power of positive thinking is more than just a cliche. Another research report that came out has looked at what are the health impacts of negative beliefs about aging. And on the other side of that, what are the health impacts if we can foster positive self-perceptions of aging? We can improve health. So researchers have found that positive self-perception of aging increased longevity by an average of 7.5 years compared to those with negative self-perceptions. 7.5 years. We can add 7.5 years to people's life if we can just engender a better and more positive belief around aging. So this work is really important. The summary of this is to say this work is really important. So how do we do it? What are some of the steps to the process of reframing an issue? We look at these in this process into three buckets, and we'll dive into each one of these in a little bit more depth here. But the first step of our process was we wanted to map the terrain. Our goal was to understand, how do people think about aging? How do people think about older people? What are some of those dominant, persistent, under the surface ideas that we carry with us every single day that help us make sense of issues that are presented to us? And once we understand the environment and the terrain that we're navigating, we can develop, and what we did was develop and test communication strategies that help navigate to a higher ground, that help get to that more productive thinking about aging. And then this is where you all join us. We're here to share some of those strategies with you so that you not only find them interesting, but you also start to contextualize it in the work that you do and imagine how you can apply this in your day-to-day work as an extra tool in your toolbox. In thinking about what we learned in that mapping the terrain section of our work, we look at some of these core questions that were asked in the research with a nationally representative sample of the US public. And we wanted to understand, in relation to some of these core questions about aging, what is the general public's default response to these core questions versus how experts in the field of aging would want people's default response to be? So researchers interviewed experts and thought leaders in the field and surveyed that nationally representative sample of the US public. And this is what we found. The graphic highlights some of the stark differences that researchers found between attitudes of aging experts and the public. You see the aging experts on the left-hand side of the screen in blue boxes, and the public's kind of default response on the right-hand side in the gray boxes. And one example when we talk about aging is we in the field want people to embrace and celebrate aging, right? We are all aging every single day. Aging doesn't start when you turn 60 or 65. We are all actively aging every single day, and we want to celebrate that, embrace it. But for the public, that default response is a battle, right? Think about the marketing materials that exist to teach us to fight the gray hairs, to get rid of our wrinkles, to maintain our youthful appearance. So we're taught to battle aging. And we can see, again, that the difference that exists there. Another example is the gap in how people respond to the question of what can be done to ensure well-being in older age. And I could ask my California Department of Aging colleagues here with me on our Zoom webinar and all of you to list one program of the many programs that you help make happen every single day that are designed to help people age well and help ensure well-being as we age. But so we know we're steeped in it. We help make the programs happen, right? We know that there's plenty that can be done to ensure well-being in older age or as we age. But for the public, there's this response that's kind of a shrug of the shoulders. It is what it is. You're dealt the cards you're dealt. Deal with it. Is kind of there's nothing much I can do. It's kind of out of my control. So again, you can see the difference, and our goal is to close the gap and help fill in the blanks with what the general public thinks is the full picture of aging with what we know to be the true, more complete picture of aging. So before we begin to talk about reframing aging, I think it's important to do some context setting of what we mean by framing and why that is so important. And the basic idea here is that we are all communicators. We are communicating every single day. If you are talking with people, whether that's through a formal presentation or through community engagement, or you're writing briefs about a program or an event that's happening in your community, if you send emails, all of these are modes of communication. So whether you have a big C communicator title or not, you are communicating. And when we communicate, we're making decisions about what we want to emphasize, how we want to explain it, and what we need to leave unsaid. And most of the time we do this in an unconscious way. You might think about the last time you, I don't know, presented going to dinner with a friend, and you're gonna really lean into some aspects of that that you know your friend will really enjoy. You're going to choose to explain some things about how good the food is at this place that you've been to before and that you really want them to experience it. And you might choose to leave some things unsaid, that this is on the other side of town. And, you know, I'm not in California, but I know California is notorious for traffic. We're going to have to sit through a lot of traffic to get there. You might not mention that when you're presenting this to your friend as an option. Right, so most of the time we do this in just kind of a natural, unthinking way. And framing and reframing in particular is about making these choices strategically, being aware of what we're saying and what that will do because of what we know exists, that terrain that we're navigating. Um, so again, this is really when we think about reframing, it's really being strategic and making these choices by understanding what those choices might do, what folks might not know. So we really need to explain it, or maybe what that dominant narrative is that we don't need to underscore and highlight for them because that is already top of mind for them. And a primary reason that framing matters is because what we as communicators face is this you say, they think challenge. So we look at a message, we spend a lot of time thinking it through. It makes a lot of sense to us. So when we say something like the elderly, we're thinking about the people that we are working with. We're thinking of someone who's engaged in community life, who's well respected in the community. Because we have all of that context and experience that helps inform our image of that person. But when we say something like the elderly for a public audience who doesn't have that same experience, their default image of a person might be someone who is frail, dependent on others for care, disengaged from community life. And this happens because of that terrain that we're navigating. And I want to do a quick aside here because I think it's really interesting. But a small part of our research actually looked at this. Before researchers advanced in the work, they wanted to understand what labels should we be using to talk about this population over the age of 65, roughly. And so they tested a couple of different terms. The words on your screen are the ones that we've tested. So senior, elder, senior citizen, older person, older adult. And we looked at them on two scales. The first was we wanted to understand how old do people presume this person to be? If we talk about senior, how old do you think that person is versus older adult? Because we want people to get to the right age group. But we also want them to get to a perceived level of competency. So we asked some questions around perceived competency. You can see where some of these words fall. Again, this is a small part of our research, but through this, we got to the recommendation of using older people, older person, older Californian, older American, whatever context that you're in. Generally speaking, that gets people to thinking of someone in the age group that we're oftentimes referring to and thinking of someone who is competent and engaged. So I caveat this by saying know your audience, know your community. For some communities, elder is a term of respect and it's understood that way. And if that works where you are, then use it. But just wanted to share some insight into why you might hear me say older people versus seniors in our presentations. So on the flip side, when we say and when we use the phrase "we are all aging," that leads to a different type of response. That default response looks a little bit different, and the public is more likely to think of that collective responsibility that this is about me, this is about my community. I have a responsibility to be engaged, and I have a benefit from listening. So we want to think about this you say, they think challenge and how we can turn it into an opportunity for ourselves. And as I mentioned, this is driven by the the research term would be cultural models, but really it's that way of thinking. In the absence of expert knowledge, in the absence of experience, that we all default to these cultural models, these patterns of thinking that we've been developing over our life to make sense of issues. We all consume so much information every single day, and so we need shortcuts to make sense of all of that. And this is what we refer to as cultural models, those patterns of thinking. And again, we want to understand what are those about the issues that we're trying to communicate about so that I can communicate more effectively and navigate around the ones that might not be helpful to me, and cue the ones that are more productive and helpful to my message. And when we change cultural and changing mental models, changing these cultural models is not an overnight task. This doesn't happen in a day, a week, or a month, even years. But we have a theory of change here, and you start to see it. So the more that we can apply these principles to our communications, people start to model that and mirror that back to us. So we start to see the discourse change, how people are talking about it, adapt and change. That leads to subtle differences in how we're thinking, getting people more to that positive, productive perception of aging. And that's where we start to see some policy and program support grow. So this is our theory of change, and we've started to see it. I would put forth to you that when I first learned about this work 5 years ago, not as many people were saying the "as we age" phrase that we hear much more prominently now than we did 5 years ago. So again, we looked at this terrain, and to make sense of it, researchers identified themes and then put those themes into two buckets. We have traps that we want to avoid. These are patterns of thinking that get in the way of our message that we want to get out, the goal of our communications. But then we also have these patterns of thinking that we put into the bucket of strategies we want to advance. These are patterns of thinking that exist for folks. They just tend to reside under the surface. And so we want to understand what are some things that principles, some strategies we can use that help us navigate around the traps, and cue those strategies, cue those productive thoughts. So this is the entire picture of the map. I know that you have about 30 minutes until noon, and I don't want to get in the way of you and lunch. So we're not going to go through each one of these, but we did identify a few strategies that we wanted to share with you and talk with you and then share some examples. So the three patterns of thinking that the public has that we want to try to activate um, are summarized here. And the first is using the building momentum metaphor to talk about aging as forward movement. And the idea that we are communicating is that as we age, we gain new insight, new wisdom, new experience, and we can use all of that to contribute to our communities. And we as communities need to be seeing that as an untapped resource. And you can see and feel a different energy with that type of language, right? Instead of being a drain on community resources, we're suddenly talking about opportunity and how we have this rich resource in our community that's untapped, and we really need to figure out how we can tap into it. And it has a big effect in how people think about aging, right? It really is a different story from the more dominant narrative that you all summarized in that word cloud just a few moments ago. And the use of the we and us language in this strategy is also really, really important. Again, getting back to the idea that this is about all of us. And we want to keep reminding people that you are aging every single day. So this is about all of us, and we all need to be engaged. The next strategy that we want to advance is to explain what our community needs to look like so that each and every one of us has what we need to live meaningful lives as we age, no matter our circumstances. We can also use this as an opportunity to share that we all rely on community supports throughout our entire life. I use the example of independence when I was going to middle school meant that there was a school bus that came 3 blocks from my house that I was able to walk to independently that allowed my parents to get to work on time where they needed to be and allowed me to have access to my education, right? That was me independently getting to school, but I was relying and being dependent on that community resource that my community was providing for me. So, with that, I say independence is a misnomer, right? We all rely on resources for our independence. That just looks and might shift at different stages in our life. But this strategy really taps into this idea that the public does have that we are interconnected, and we have a responsibility to be engaged in the solutions that are presented to us, and we have a benefit in doing so as well. So we really want to paint that picture for people. And then the final strategy, and one of the most important strategies, especially right now, is to prompt the can-do attitude. So one of the things that we learned is that the public is, remember that kind of shrug of the shoulders response, the public is very fatalistic, that anything can be done about these big challenges. So we want to prompt that idea that we are creative, inventive, problem-solving people. We have encountered big problems before, and we figured out how to navigate through them. So here we're really wanting to tap into that can-do attitude that Americans are known for. And embedded within this strategy is also the reminder to always include a solution in our message. If we're going to talk about challenges that exist, we want to start by prompting that can-do attitude, talking about maybe some of the challenges, and then always, always, always including a solution to make sure that we're not unintentionally reinforcing that fatalistic mindset that is so dominant in how the public addresses and comes to these issues. So some examples. This is one of our favorite examples from colleagues in the city of Boston, who reframed or changed the name of their city's Commission on Aging. It used to be something about Seniors and Elderly Services Commission. And they wanted to rebrand that. And so they went to older Bostonians and said, what are the adjectives that you want us to use when talking about the programs and services that are designed to support you? And they came back with strong and experienced level to the surface. So their city commission is now known as the Age Strong Commission on Aging. And as part of this rebranding effort, there was lots of different tactics that they used, but one of them was to rebrand this transportation service in their community. So you can see on the screen that the senior shuttle is what was pasted on the side of this bus, and then they rebranded it. And instead, it now says in that small blue print, it says transporting Boston's most experienced people. And just think about what this does if you were to choose which bus you were getting on. I would be much more likely to get the bus calling me experienced. So you can think about the way and the impact that this has on people utilizing the service. Then also think about how many people, how many Bostonians this bus passes by every single day, and that split second reaction that someone's having and judgment that someone's having about the people utilizing that service, and how that might be different if we're presenting that as these are experienced members of your community. The next example that we share with you is we think about how to explain the supports we need to live meaningful lives and how that benefits all of us, not just the specific group we're talking about, is the curb cut effect. So curb cuts were originally inspired by someone who used a wheelchair to navigate their community and had challenges getting across the street. And then they were required with the Americans with Disability Act. But we all use curb cuts. We all benefit from curb cuts. Can think about if you're using a wheelchair, you certainly benefit, but also think about delivery drivers who have dollies and how that might help them, families with strollers. I think about my niece who's learning how to ride her bike and how curb cuts in her neighborhood help her navigate the sidewalks much safer. So this infrastructure, critical infrastructure, designed originally for one group of people, has vast impacts for all of us and has vast positive benefits for all of us. So we really want to paint the picture of what these community supports are and how that really helps lift our entire community. And then again, we want to prompt that can-do attitude, and just share a different narrative, put out and wrap people with different messages around aging to help counterbalance that dominant narrative that folks are currently surrounded by. And for this, we share examples from colleagues in Worthington, Ohio, who part of their age-friendly community work uh, looked at signs to say, how do we want people to be talking about age? So you see one sign here that says aging, so cool that everyone is doing it. And then there's another sign that says engage at every age. And then the third sign says be thankful for the gift of age. So while a lot of our work shows up in a very narrative format, we share some of these examples with you to say it doesn't have to be a long white paper on an issue area. It certainly is there too. But it's also in these small ways that we're communicating and engaging with our community. And then before I pass it over to Connie to talk about some of their toolkit, I wanted to end with sharing a few resources with you. One here is a reminder that just like words, images play an important role in the messages we send about older people. And our research partner, the Frameworks Institute, worked with AARP to develop some tips and recommendations around that, which is accessible through this QR code, and we can make sure that link is made available to you after the webinar. And then a few California specific examples, and many thanks to our CDA partners for sharing this with us. But I'll point out here that you have some really good documents that already exist in your state. So you can see here that this tagline, leading with equity so all Californians thrive, is a great use of that we and us language we talked about. And then another good example here is a resource around protecting yourself from fraud. And we see a great diversity of images here, but also really critical are the older people featured here are engaged with technology, where oftentimes the images we see of older people using technology is in a matter of frustration. We know that that's a dominant story around older people. We don't need to reinforce that. So this is a great example of how images are helping with the message. And then we also talked about the terms that we use for people over the age of 60. And what is really important, what I don't think I said, is that where we are able to be specific and talk about a specific age demographic, we need to do that. So we see that here in how we're talking about legal assistant programs for adults ages 60 and older. We really want to define that for folks because they might not have, they might not define older adult in the same way that we are. And then I want you to know that these strategies work, and we're here to help you. So we work with organizations, partners all over the country to help think through how to have a reframing aging strategy of your own, but also making sure that you have access to resources. So there's a variety of resources available on our website that are free and accessible to you, and I commend those to your attention, and use them, download them, share them with others. Which is where I'm going to come back to this graphic and to my invitation for thinking about where you're situated and how you might be able to contribute to this movement. And I don't want this to be a theoretical question. I want you to actually use it, do it. So you're on Zoom, which means you're on some sort of computer or cell phone, some sort of device, which also likely holds whatever calendar app you use to schedule your day-to-day life. And I ask you whether in this moment or following our webinar this morning that you create a calendar appointment for yourself 1 month from today at 9 a.m. That has the subject line and asks the question, what have I done to reframe aging this month? And you can link to our resources, link to some of the resources that Connie is going to share with you as just a gentle monthly reminder that this is work that we are all doing every single day and can show up in really small but profoundly impactful ways. So thank you again for having me and joining us this morning for this webinar. And I'm looking forward to, Connie, I'll pass the mic to you to make sure that you have some time to share some of the resources from the department.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannah. And thank you to the National Center to Reframe Aging for grounding us in why this work matters and why the language is such a powerful lever for change. As a reminder, if anyone's had any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom screen and input your questions. Now that we've seen the research and framing principles, we'll show you a little bit of how we've brought that to life with the toolkit, and we'll share some additional resources with you. Okay. So we'll send you the link to where this toolkit resides. Following the guidance, we developed the Flipping the Script on Aging toolkit, and it's an easy-to-use set of materials to help you integrate reframed messaging into your campaigns and your outreach. This toolkit includes social media content for various social platforms. It includes videos for Reels. There's also static graphic images for static posts, along with some suggested verbiage for like a templated newsletter article or a templated press release. Next slide. We'll show you a little bit of one of the campaigns that we have created is called Start the Conversation. So it's a California-focused initiative that highlights the voices of older adults and caregivers. It encourages people to talk openly about aging and also the programs and services that support older Californians, such as, our local area agencies on aging, our caregiver resource centers, and other community-based supports. Next slide. Another set of posts you'll see in the toolkit are a set of co-branded posts with the National Center to Reframe Aging, offering quick and actionable examples of how to shift everyday language about aging. You'll see each one takes a common but problematic phrase and replaces it with an inclusive and empowering alternative. You'll be able to use these posts, as is, or you can customize it. You can share it across social media platforms, or also adapt it to your newsletters and presentations or handouts. Next slide. All right. So we've also created a centralized resource page that brings together some helpful tools for changing the narrative around aging. So you'll find the resources from the National Center to Reframe Aging, some of the ones that Hannah had just shared. Like there's the quick start guide, there's videos and best practices for inclusive communication. These tools are designed to help anyone in, outreach, policy, or service delivery, shift away from outdated language towards messaging that reflects strength and inclusion. We've also included a link to some style guides. So there's one from the American Psychological Association. These guidelines focus on using bias-free language when referring to age groups and older adults, and they align with standards from the AP style book as well. We also included our CDA style guide just as a reference if you want to see how we've applied inclusive language to our style guide. So we've also included that as a reference as well. Next slide. So Reframe Aging isn't about being trendy. It's older Californians are leaders, they're caregivers, they're volunteers within the community. They're shaping communities every day. So we want to make sure the way we talk about aging reflects that. We encourage you to share the toolkit out with your networks, use the conversation starters to drive engagement during May, during Older Californians Month. And most importantly, join us in shifting the public narrative about aging. And we really hope that you enjoyed today's webinar and that you feel inspired, but also equipped with resources. And it looks like, let's see, there's not very many questions in the Q&A, but we are going to recap all the resources again with all of the links in a recap email, and we'll also send you a link to today's recording and presentation so that you have it on hand. And with that, since there's no questions, any
Well, I just
what's
want
that?
to highlight and underscore something that you shared, which is the APA style guide update. So this is actually a resource that the National Center to Reframe Aging and some of our folks in the network advocated for. So it's exciting that folks are using it and know that similar style guide updates were made to the AP and AMA style guide. So if you use whatever format you use, if you need to reference someone beyond the National Center to Reframe Aging or beyond the California Department of Aging, know that you have these other resources as a backbone to why this is so important and why this work is so critical. So thank you for highlighting and sharing that.
Great. That's awesome. And as we wrap, if there's any additional questions, you can all feel free to send it to communications@aging.ca.gov. So again, thank you for attending our webinar today. We'll send you a recap with all of the links and resources. So we hope you enjoyed the information that we put out today and hope to see you again. Thank you, everyone.